Are you guys ready? We're going to go on have a fun ride today. All right. To begin with, I've got the screen set up. Guess where we are at right now? The dire straits. Who does not know what the dire straits mean? So I need to know if I need to cover it real quickly. Everybody knows? All right. It's the day of the 17th of Tammuz to the 9th day of the month of Av. Now, right there is the 17th of Tammuz. That happened last weekend, just before. What happened on the 17th day of the month of Tammuz? They worshiped the golden calf. Historically, that day has just been horrible. As a matter of fact, in I think 2007, the Lebanon War began on the very same day. Okay, now way down at the bottom of the calendar is the 9th of Av. What happened historically on the 9th day of the month of Av? The first temple by Nebuchadnezzar was destroyed, and on the very same day, 600 years later, Rome destroyed the temple on the very same day. So these are very significant events. On the 9th of Av, historically what happened? I just showed on the 17th of Tammuz, they worshiped the golden calf. What happened on the 9th of Av? That's when the spies brought the bad report. The 10 spies, because of that day's been cursed throughout history. And this is why both temples were destroyed on the very day the spies brought the bad report. Well, we are right in the middle of that. We're on Saturday, the 15th of July, which is the 26th of Tammuz. And so we are right there. But I just told you that Rosh Chodesh, or the new moon, the first day happens on the 1st of Av, which is this coming Wednesday. All right, this coming Wednesday, July 19th, is the first day of the month of Av, and we will have the live stream so you can watch the teaching on it. Does anybody know historically? Here, let's go back to the calendar. Right there, right here's where we're at right now. Okay, historically, what happened on the first day of the month of Av? Test, quiz. We'll get a prize. Does anybody know? Here's what happened on the 1st of Av historically. It's an anniversary of a big biblical event. It is the very day Aaron dies. Nowhere in the entire Bible is the day of someone's death recorded except for Aaron. And what's fascinating, Aaron was what? The high priest. And the high priest dies, and a week later, the temple's destroyed. Isn't that fascinating? There's this connection between the 1st of Av and the 9th of Av. So the memorial for mourning the loss, not only of the house of God, but at the same time the death of Aaron the high priest, I think is an amazing connection. Now, I have a second quiz for all you Bible scholars. Where does the phrase come from, your sin will find you out? It comes from the Torah portion today. And so I'm going to show you the circumstances behind it. Are you ready? Here we go. We're going to start the Torah portion. This time it's a double Torah portion because of the calendar. They don't have the extra month, so we have to double up on Torah portions. It's Matot. Do you see the M or the Mem? Then the Tet, the Vav, and the Tav. There's two letters in Hebrew that make the T sound. And that's why the second and the last letter are both the T sound, but they're different shapes. It's Matot, which means tribes. And the other one is Massei, which means journeys. All right? So it talks about, in this Torah portion, all the different stops that Israel made over the 40 years of wandering. So if you look at your notes, in Numbers chapter 30, verse 1 and 2, Moses spoke to the heads of the Matot, the tribes of the children of Israel, and he said, this is what the Lord's commanded Whenever a man vows a vow to the Lord or swears an oath to bind his soul with the bond, he shall not break his word. He has to do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth. Now, I know from the New Testament, Yeshua said it's better, don't even make a vow. I mean, instead of making a vow, just do it. And so it's better not to make vows. Even today, don't make a vow, especially if you don't intend to keep it or think you might fail, because there's no bonus points, but only looking stupid if you make a vow and don't do it. But here's the amazing thing about God. If God says, don't you make a vow and then not keep it, how often do we read where God raises his right hand, it says, and he swears? This is why we can't believe in replacement theology, because he's vowed something. And so if you believe that the church has replaced Israel, you're saying a couple of things. You're saying that God lies. You're saying he's incapable. He's not powerful enough to fulfill what he said, or he's a liar, So it's very important. Let's go to Numbers 31, verse 1 through 6. The Lord speaking to Moses, and he says, avenge the children of Israel because of the Midianites. Now, what did the Midianites do? Why are they avenging them? The Midianites were the one, and Balaam got the children of Israel to fornicate with the Moabites. It was the Midianites that influenced the Moabites and Israel. And so now God says to Moses, avenge them. And then afterward he says, you're going to die. Well, if I was Moses, I might have put off avenging them. Especially when he says, after that, you're going to be gathered to your people. So Moses tells the people, arm men from among you for the war, that they may go against Midian to execute the Lord's vengeance on Midian. And then it says, of every tribe there should be 1,000 people. So they were delivered out of the thousands of Israel, 1,000 of every tribe. So there's 12 tribes, so there's 12,000 men armed for war. And then Moses sent them to the war, and look who goes to the war. Phinehas, the priest, were dressed for battle. Most people think the armor of God is some Roman soldier costume. No, the armor of God is led by the high priest's garments. It's the priestly garments. And he says, Phinehas, the son of Eleazar the priest, goes to the war with the vessels of the sanctuary and the shofars for the alarm in his hand. What's interesting, I believe the word for alarm here is teruah. How many of you have ever heard of an alarm clock? The purpose of the alarm is to wake you up. And here we see the shofars are tied to the alarm clock, and we know when not Saul, or the taking up of all the believers, it will happen on Rosh Hashanah, because that's the Feast of Trumpets. And the alarm is teruah, which means to wake up. An alarm is to wake you up. And on the Feast of Trumpets is when the dead will wake up. So this event, we don't know what year, we don't set dates, but it will happen some year on Rosh Hashanah. Now, he's supposed to be anointed for the war. How many of you remember Zechariah 4:6? It's not by power, it's not by might, but it's by what? My spirit. Okay. Well, look at Numbers 31:8, what they did in their avenging. It says they killed all the kings of Midian with the rest of their slain. And then it says the 5 kings of Midian, and then look at this. Balaam, the son of Beor, they killed with the sword. So Balaam got his comeuppance at this time as well. And then in Numbers 32:1, the battle's over, and now they're trying to go settle, cross the Jordan, and go conquer the promised land. But it says the children of Reuben and the children of Gad had a great multitude of livestock. And when they saw the land of Jazer and the land of Gilead, it was a place for livestock. Now, how many of us believe we can see better than God? We know better than God? It doesn't happen. They were looking again by sight, and they thought they hadn't even crossed the promised land, and they already thought it was better not being in the promised land. And in verse 5 through 7, look what they say to Moses. If we found favor in your sight, let this land be given to your servants for a possession. Don't take us over Jordan. And so now Moses is really mad, and he says, what? Are your brothers going to go to the war, and you're just going to sit here? Why are you discouraging the heart of the children of Israel from going over to the land which the Lord has given them? So guess what they said? The children of Reuben and the children of Gad said, in verse 16 through 18, they said, okay, look, and I want you to really pay close attention to what they said. We will build sheepfolds here for our livestock and cities for our little ones, but we ourselves will be ready armed to go before the children of Israel until we brought them to their place. And our little ones will dwell in the fortified cities because of the inhabitants of the land. And then we will not return to our houses until the children of Israel have inherited every man his inheritance. So in other words, Reuben and Gad, they were very boastful. They were very prideful. And so they said, look, we want this side, but we'll go fight. We'll even lead the battle. We'll be the tip of the spear going into the promised land. And then after we've conquered, then we'll go back. But here's what I want you to notice. They were more concerned about their sheep than their kids. Okay, we'll build stuff for our sheep. Oh, and then we'll also build them for our kids. They didn't put the kids first. They put the sheep first. And watch how Moses reproves them. And now, here they made a vow that they were going to go across the Jordan to defend Israel. And look at Numbers 32, 33. But if you will not do so, Moses says, you've sinned against the Lord, and be sure your sin will find you out. So when you hear that verse, it comes from this Torah portion, and it has to do with making a vow and not fulfilling it. In Numbers 32:24, listen to how Moses rephrases that sentence. Build cities for your little ones first, and then your sheepfolds, and do that which has proceeded out of your mouth. So he says, you better do what you said, but why don't you reverse the order, put the kids first, and then the sheep. And so let's look at verse 31 through 33. The children of Gad, the children of Reuben said, as the Lord has said to your servants, that's what we'll do. We're going to pass over armed before the Lord into the land of Canaan, and the possession of our inheritance will remain with us beyond Jordan. You know what's the bad thing about that? How stupid? You realize they were the first ones to go into captivity? In the Assyrian captivity, they were the first ones in Jordan to be taken captive. And so it says, Moses gave to them, even to the children of Gad, and to the children of Reuben, and to the half-tribe of Manasseh, the sons of Joseph, the kingdom of Sihon, king of the Amorites, and the kingdom of Og, king of Bashan, the land according to the cities and borders, even the cities of the surrounding land. What in the world is the half-tribe of Manasseh doing there? It was only Reuben and Gad that wanted that. Manasseh didn't want it. Moses thought that Gad and Reuben would fall away from the Torah, create a tabernacle of their own or a temple of their own. So Moses asked the half-tribe of Manasseh to go with them to help keep them faithful to the Torah. Okay, so what happens? In Numbers 32, 39 through 41, and the children of Machir, the son of Manasseh, he went to Gilead, and he took it, and he dispossessed the Amorites, which was in it. And Moses gave Gilead to him. So we hear the half-tribe of Manasseh is one of the first tribes to conquer the territory. And it said, and Yair, the son of Manasseh, went and took the small towns, and they called him Havoth Yair. All right, so this brings us now to the next Torah portion, Massei journeys. And we see in Numbers 33, verse 1 and 2. It says, these are the journeys, or Massei, of the children of Israel, which went out of Egypt with their armies under the hand of Moses and Aaron. And look at this. Moses wrote their goings in and out according to their journeys by the commandment of the Lord. So this tells us God commanded them to scrapbook. God loves to scrapbook. And these are his kids. And he says, hey, I want to make a journal. I want to record everywhere. Just like when you go to Israel, you try to bring a journal of all the different sites and things you see. Well, God loves a scrapbook. And so he asked them to do that. Now, the word Massah, which is what Massei comes from, means a departure. So they're departing one camp and they're going to go to another camp. It also comes from the root word Nassah, which means to pull up the tent stakes. So let's look at Numbers 33, 38, 39. Here we see Aaron the priest goes up to Mount Hor at the commandment of the Lord, and he dies. In the 40th year of the children of Israel, came out of Egypt on when? The first day of the 5th month, next Wednesday. The only place recorded in the whole Bible that someone dies. And look at this. Aaron was 123 years old. How old was Moses when he died? 120. They all died the same year. Moses, Miriam, Aaron all died the same year. And so we see he was 123, Moses was 120, and Miriam was 127. He was 7 years older than Moses, 4 years older than Aaron. And then, now here comes something new for most of you. So I really want you to pay attention. I'm going to jump out of the Torah portion for a moment because we're going to talk about Miriam a little bit here as well. Remember in the story of Moses being born and Pharaoh's daughter? Does anybody know? Don't say it. If you know, raise your hand. What was the daughter of Pharaoh's name that picked up Moses? Oh, Mike Harbert knows. Anybody else? Do you know what? It's hidden in the Bible. It's hidden. And so I'm going to show you where it was. And I think it's fascinating how it goes because look at this. I think this is so crazy. In Exodus 2, 5 through 11, and the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river. Some of the sages say she was going to do a mikvah in the river and convert to Judaism. That's why she was really going down there. But her maidens are walking along by the riverside, and when she saw the ark among the flags, she sent her maid to fetch it. And when she opened it, she saw the child, and the baby was crying. And she had compassion on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrew children." And how did she know? He's circumcised. Then said his sister, this is Miriam, to who? Pharaoh's daughter. You want me to go and call a nurse of the Hebrew women that she can nurse the child for you? And then look what it says. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." And the maid went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse it, and I will give you your wages." And so the woman took the child and nursed it, and the child grew, and she brought him into who? Pharaoh's daughter. I keep saying, Pharaoh, why don't you give me your name? You know. And then he became her son. Now look at this. Pharaoh's daughter calls his name what? Moses or Moshe, which means to pull out of the water. But it's been a while. So what was Moses' Hebrew name? We know Moses is not a Hebrew word. It's an Egyptian word. And the boys are named when they're circumcised. So he had a Hebrew name. Does anyone know what Moses' real name was, his birth name? How many of you do know? Most of you do know. It was Tovia. Tovia was Moses' really name. Moses was his Egyptian name given by Pharaoh's daughter. Okay, and then it says, it came to pass when Moses was grown, he went out to his brethren and looked on their burdens, and he's fighting Egyptians, fighting a Hebrew. Okay, now this isn't on your notes, but I'm going to tell you a story because I love stories. There is a commentary or midrash, listen to this, that attributes the salvation of all of Israel to Pharaoh's daughter. She's the one who saved Moses. If she hadn't saved Moses, Moses wouldn't have saved Israel. Therefore, they give her the credit. Just like the astrologers talked to Herod, Pharaoh's astrologers saw in the stars that one destined to save Israel would be punished through water. And they knew that it was time for that Messiah. And this is why Pharaoh issued the decree to throw all the boys in the water. Just like they said the Messiah is coming and Herod kills them all, back then, the astrologers told Pharaoh a Messiah is coming and he's to be killed in the water. And so what is interesting, this is why Pharaoh said, every boy that is born you're to throw in the Nile. Well, once Moses was placed in the water, the astrologers thought we no longer see that sign until they stopped the decree because he was placed in the water. Now, here's the thing. It says, why was Pharaoh's daughter in the river? Well, they believed it was like a water baptism to cleanse herself from the idols of her father's house. Like she had a skin rash, and when she gets in the water, she gets healed. All right. Let me ask you this. Pharaoh's daughter is Moses' stepmom, right? How old was she? Many think she was probably a teenager, okay, a young girl. Do you think Pharaoh's daughter, who we don't know the name of yet, crossed the Red Sea with the rest of Israel? I mean, if I was Moses, I'd want to save my mom, Here, so let's take a look and see what happens. Look at this. Now, what's her name? Pharaoh's daughter. But let me show you a secret place in the Bible. In 1 Chronicles, chapter 4, verse 15 through 18, it says, and the sons of Caleb, Joshua and Caleb, the two good guys, the son of Jephunneh, and then it mentions their generations, and it says, and these are the sons of Bat-Yah, the daughter of Pharaoh. Right there it is. And what does Bat mean in Hebrew? Bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah. Bat is daughter. Yah, she was named the daughter of God. And look at this. The Midrash relates that the daughter of Pharaoh received her name Bat-Yah, which literally means the daughter of God. She received it from God as a reward for her actions. And here's what God said to her. Moses was not your son, yet you called him your son. You are not my daughter, but now I'm calling you my daughter. And so here, because of that, God gave her the name Bat-Yah. And so what's amazing is she crossed the Red Sea with all of Israel. And she was given to Merid. Okay, I just thought that was kind of an interesting story. Okay, so Numbers 33, 50 through 53, the Lord tells Moses in the plains of Moab by the Jordan at Jericho, and we'll be going down there this October. He says, speak to the people of Israel and tell them when you pass over the Jordan, you're to drive out all the inhabitants of the land. You know, the problem is they didn't drive them out, and therefore they became thorns in their sides to this day. If they'd only done what they were supposed to do, sometimes being nice isn't the right thing. And it says, I want you to go destroy all their figurines, destroy all their metal images, demolish all their high places. And then look what happens in verse 55 and 56. If you will not drive out the inhabitants of the land, it'll come to pass, those which you let remain will be pricks in your eyes, thorns in your sides, and they're going to vex you in the land that you dwell. And so this is the problem. We think we know better often than God. Okay, now we come to the Haftarah. Where am I? Okay, good. The Haftarah means the portion of the prophets that go with this Torah portion. And here comes some very mind-blowing things. Are you ready? Jeremiah chapter 2, verse 5 and 6. Thus says the Lord to Israel, what iniquity have I done? What have I done that your fathers found in me, that you've gone far from me? You've walked after vanity, and you become vain. Now look at this. Neither did they say, where's the Lord that brought us up out of the land of Egypt, that led us through the wilderness, through a land of deserts and pits, through a land of drought, the shadow of death, through a land that no man passed through, where no man dwelled. Can you imagine? They forgot God. Here God did all these wonderful things, and they're going on their way, and they don't even look behind them to see if God's with them. They don't look in front of them to see if God's leading them. They actually, after all God did for them, how many of you felt like you've done something wonderful for someone and then they forgot you? They never thanked you. They never acknowledged you. It's just, thanks a lot. See you later. I'm on my way. Think how God feels. Well, here's what's worse. It's one thing when the people say, where is the Lord? But what about the priest who's supposed to know better? He's the one who's supposed to connect the people and God. If anyone needs to know where the Lord is, it's the priest. And yet look at verse 7 and 8, the very next verses. God says, I brought you to a plentiful country to eat the fruit and the goodness, but when you entered, you defiled the land, you made my heritage an abomination, and the priest didn't even ask, where is the Lord? Now that's getting really bad. How can you expect the people to ask if the priests don't even ask? And then it says, look at this. The priests did not say, where is the Lord? And those who are the ones that are handling my laws, they don't even know me. And the pastors transgress against me. And the prophets prophesy by Baal and do things that don't profit. I can't help but think of Revelation 3:20. God says, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hear my voice and open the door, I'll come in and sup with him and he with me. This is used as a salvation verse. No, he's knocking at the door of the church of Laodicea. And they're saying, leave us alone, God. We're having church. But look at Jeremiah 2:11. Has a nation changed their gods, which aren't gods, but my people, he says, my people have changed their glory for that which doesn't profit. I can't help but think of Romans 1:22-23, where it talks about people who profess to be wise, they become fools, and here it is. They've changed the glory of the uncorruptible God to an image made like a corruptible man, and to birds, four-footed beasts, creeping things. What happens when we forget God? We end up changing our own image. And look what's happening today. Okay, now back to Jeremiah 2. This is incredible. I'm going to have to talk about this more on another Shabbat, but I'm going to bring something up that you may not have made the connection before. So now he says, back to Jeremiah 2, he says, be astonished, you heavens, and be horribly afraid. Be very desolate, says the Lord. He says, for the heathen. No. He says, my people have committed two evils. Number one, they have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and then they've hewn out cisterns that are broken that can't even hold water. So we see they have says they've forsaken me, and he is known as the fountain of living waters, right? Well, now, look at Jeremiah 2:25. But you said there is no hope. No, because I love strangers, and after them I will go. Wow. The Hebrew word for hope is like mikveh, which also refers to water. But now listen to this. They said, okay, I've loved strangers, and there's no hope for me. How many people do we find that are estranged from God, and they say, well, there's no hope, so I'm just going to continue in my sin? God can't forgive me, or he won't forgive me. So untrue. Okay, how many have ever heard of the sota? You never heard of that term, but you know what I'm talking about. Back in the Torah, the sota was the wife who was suspected of adultery, and she had to drink dirt and water, and if she had committed adultery, her belly would swell and her thigh would rot and all these horrible things. But if she hadn't committed adultery, she would get pregnant. And they say a lot of the barren women would purposely try to make her husband think she committed adultery just so she'd have kids because she was barren. And she knew she'd be acquitted and then she could get pregnant. But anyway, what's interesting about this story, look at Numbers 5, verse 16 and 17. Here's what the priest has to do. He has to bring her near, set her before the Lord. She has to be set before the Lord. And the priest is to take holy water in an earthen vessel, and of the dust that is in the floor of the tabernacle, the priest will take it and put it into water. So I want you to imagine, here's the priest. He comes before, right in the middle of the tabernacle. He has a vessel of living water, and then he takes of the dirt that's right there in the tabernacle and puts it in the vessel and mix it together. Well, there's some crazy things I want to share with you guys. First off, when you think of an earthen vessel, what are we called? We're an earthen vessel. Humans are an earthen vessel. Well, guess what? Yeshua was the earthen vessel filled with holy water. Living water. And the dust that's in the floor of the tabernacle. What is man from? Dirt. Dust. And the two are mixed together. Well, according to the Torah, the sota law kicks in when a man suspects his wife of being unfaithful. Why? Okay, well, let me just say this. And he warns her to not seclude herself with any other man, and if it is established that she ignored that warning, she becomes a subject to this ritual involving her drinking a concoction of water, a bit of dirt from under the temple and marble floor, or under the temple. Now, here's the thing. That was Moses' tabernacle. During during Herod's time, this is Herod's temple, when Yeshua would go into this temple. They have discovered tiles. These are actual marble floor tiles from the temple that Yeshua walked in that they've discovered in some of the archaeological digs. Well, the temple was completely covered with these tiles. Where did they get the dirt to do the Sotah ceremony? There was one specific tile that would be picked up and moved, and they grab a teaspoon of the dirt and put the tile back down. That way they're fulfilling the law. You following me? Okay, now watch this. In John, we're going to jump to John chapter 7, verse 37 and 38, you're going to find was the Feast of Tabernacles. Okay, that's in the fall, September, October. It's a 7-day feast, and there's an 8th day added. And look at this. In John 7, 37, 38, it was the last day, the great day of the feast, that Jesus stood and cried out, and he said, if any man thirst, let him come to me and drink. Whoever believes on me, as the scripture has said, out of his belly will flow what? Rivers of living water, because he is the vessel that is filled with living water. And then in verse 45 through 49, the officers came to the chief priests and the Pharisees, and they said unto them, how come you haven't brought him? And the officers said, no one ever spoke like this guy. And then the Pharisees said, are you also deceived? Have any of the rulers of the Pharisees believed on him? This people who don't know the law are cursed. So what is happening? These priests and Pharisees, have just forsaken the fountain of living waters. Following me? Now watch how this unfolds. John 8 is the next day. Simchat Torah, they're supposed to be rejoicing in the Torah, but instead they bring an adulterous woman and they want to use the Torah to kill her. Look at this. Jesus goes to the Mount of Olives, and then early in the morning, this is the very next day, he comes again into the temple. Everybody comes to him, he sits down, and he taught them. And then the scribes and Pharisees brought him a woman taken into adultery. And when they had set her in the midst, they say, Master, this woman was taken in adultery, the very act. You know, Moses says, kill her, what would you do? Well, first off, according to Moses, especially if they were caught in the act, you're supposed to bring both the man and the woman. How come the man's not there? But guess what? And how come it wasn't her husband who brought her? Why are these other guys bringing her? Well, in the law of Moses, or the Torah, it says that if you falsely accuse someone, those who falsely accused her, they suffer the same thing that's supposed to happen to the wrongly accused. Okay, so look at this. John 8, 1 through 4. 8, 6 through 8. This they said, tempting him, that they might have reason to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down and with his finger wrote on the what? He removed the marble floor. He's writing in the very dirt that was used for the woman that was suspected of committing adultery. It's the same spot. There was no dirt in the temple. There were marble squares. So it's in the very same spot that he begins to write. Anyone ever wonder what he wrote? I'll tell you what they wrote. What Yeshua wrote in the dirt. It's in the Bible. This is why you got to connect the dots. Look at this. This they said, tempting him, that they might have reason to accuse him, but Yeshua stooped down, and with his finger he wrote on the ground as though he didn't hear them. So when they continued asking him, he lifted up himself and said to them, he that is without sin, let him cast the first stone at her. And again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. What are we having a mixture of? His finger and dirt, and he's the living water mixing with the dirt that was required for the Sotah woman. You're having that same mixture. Well, go to Jeremiah. Look at chapter 17, 13. It says, O Lord, the hope of Israel, all that forsake you will be ashamed, and those that depart from me shall be written in the earth, because they forsaken the Lord, the fountain of living waters. He was writing their names in the dirt. It's right there. And then he says in Jeremiah 2, 19 and 20, your own wickedness is what's going to correct you. Your backsliding will reprove you. Know therefore and see that it is an evil thing and bitter that you have forsaken the Lord your God. And those were the bitter waters that they had to drink. And then it says this. For of old time, God says, I have broken your yoke. I burst your bonds. In other words, you were in bondage, and I'm the one who set you free. And then you said, well, I'm not going to serve you. We used our freedom to run from his laws. Isn't that it? They're not going to put on God's yoke. So we hear a lot of preachers today. Break loose yourself. Be free from God's laws. Look at Jeremiah 2, 26 through 30. As the thief is ashamed when he's found, so is the house of Israel ashamed, their kings, princes, priests, prophets, who tell us, stick, you are my father, and a stone, you are the one who brought me out. It says they have turned their back to me and not their face, and then in the time of their trouble, they're going to say, save us. But where are your gods that you made for yourselves? Let them arise if they can save you in the time of your trouble. Okay, so that's what God's going to say. Why will you contend with me? You've transgressed against me, says the Lord. I've spanked you in vain. They received no correction. Your own sword has devoured your prophets. Now look at this last verse. Jeremiah 2, 31 and 32. Generation, he says, consider the word of the Lord. Have I been a wilderness to Israel or a land of thick darkness? Look what God says. Why do my people say, we have broken loose? We will come to you no more. Can a virgin forget her ornaments or a bride her attire? Yet my people have forgotten me for days without number. That's why I have this thing flying. For days without number, and all they want to do is break loose and be free from God's laws. Here God frees them from the laws of man, and now they also want to be free from the laws of God. Okay, so with that said, we're going to stand. And one last prayer we always say whenever we're ending one book of the Torah. Next week, we're going to start the book of Deuteronomy. So let's all say this together. Kazak, Kazak, Vinet, Kazak. Be strong, and be strengthened. Turn to someone and tell them to be strong. That's right. Now is not the time to be weak. Now is the time to be strong. So let's pray. Avinu Malkeinu, our Father King, I just thank you that those who walk in the light are going to be strong. Those who walk in darkness are the ones who are going to be afraid. And so, Father, we have no fear. We know you are for us. Who can be against us? Father, I thank you for all the strong lights that are here right now in this building, and all the strong lights all over the United States, all over the world who are tuning in right now and watching. Father, bless them. Bless the work of their hands. Bless them as they sow seeds into your kingdom, into your Torah, taking your word to the nations. We just thank you so much for those that give into this ministry of yours, Father, so that we can all be lights together. In Yeshua's name, amen. Together, blessed are you, Lord our God, creator and king of the universe. You have blessed us with your Torah of truth. You have blessed us with the whole counsel of your living word by the power of your Holy Spirit through the completed work of Messiah, Yeshua. You alone have planted among us life eternal. Blessed are you. I am really excited about what we're going to be talking about. Last week, we were talking about replacement theology and how it's affected our biblical thinking. We talked about last week how non-Jews can develop a wrong understanding, and I talked about how the serpent was really a crocodile, and I talked about how God, when he hardened Pharaoh's heart, he actually strengthened Pharaoh's heart. We talked about the rooster crowing, which never happened. It was a priest who had the title of rooster. We talked about the woman at the well, who everyone thought was horrible, but actually was one of the holiest women in the whole New Testament. And then we talked about blind Bartimaeus, how he was the only one who could actually see. Today we're going to talk about some other missed connections. I have 3 missed connections, but it's because of our lack of the Hebrew culture. So, how many of you have ever heard of the Amida? Who has never heard of the Amida? Wow. Okay. Those of you that aren't familiar are going to be blown away. The Amida, and we have the Amida in folders we can make available to everyone for free. This is 18 blessings. It's a prayer that is said 3 times a day. But guess what? It was written in 450 BC. And it was written by Ezra, Nehemiah, at the rebuilding of the temple when they rebuilt it. And 3 times a day at the hours of prayer, which is 9 in the morning, the time of the morning sacrifice, noon, and then 3 in the evening, the time of the evening sacrifice. So 3 times a day they would say this prayer. But guess what? That means Jesus said this prayer 3 times a day his entire life. To think we are holding right here a prayer that is over 2,000 years old, that Jesus prayed this prayer 3 times every day. It's a pretty cool prayer. So I'm going to talk about it. Now, the Amida is known as the standing prayer. So guess what you do when you say this prayer? You guys are good. Okay. Now, there's a mistranslation in every English Bible. Again, it's in Acts chapter 3, verse 1. It says, "Now Peter and John went up together into the temple at the hour of prayer." Wrong translation. It's at the hour of the prayer, and this is the prayer that they said. And then it says, being the what hour? 9th hour. That's 3 in the afternoon, time of the evening sacrifice. So they were going up at the very time all of Israel is standing, wanting to say the standing prayer. Now, this prayer, like I said, is over 2,400 years old, all right? And there's 18 blessings in it. And so you have to realize that this prayer was being said 3 times a day, almost 500 years before Jesus was even born. This is entrenched in the Jewish thinking. Well, guess what? Here in the book of Acts, let's look at a proper translation now in chapter 3, verse 1 through 2. "Now Peter and John went up together into the temple at the hour of the prayer." This is the prayer. And it says, "There was a certain man who was lame from his mother's womb." Here is a man who's never been able to stand for the standing prayer. But we miss that whole connection if we don't know it's the standing prayer, that they're laying this man down who's never been able to stand. And look at this. It says, after being the 9th hour, "And there was a certain man lame from his mother's womb." This is for his entire life he was carried, "whom they laid daily at the gate of the temple," which is called Beautiful, to ask alms of those that entered the temple. That's the eastern gate. Now, guess what? Look at Acts 4:22. This man was over 40 years old on whom this miracle of healing was shown. Do you know what that means? This man was older than Jesus. Every time Jesus went through the eastern gate, he looked at that guy and he waved and never healed him. He's over 40 years old. Jesus died around 33. Jesus never healed this guy. He was waiting for him to be healed at the time of the evening prayer during the Feast of Shavuot. Now watch this. It says he was laid daily at the gate. Every day for 40 years, he's been praying 3 times a day. One of the prayers is for healing. We're going to take a look at it here in a minute. Here's the prayer for healing. I have it for you guys. It's from here, but I have it on your notes. Here's what this lame man prayed every day for 40 years. "Heal us, O Lord, and we will be healed. Save us, and we will be saved. You are our praise. O grant a perfect healing to all of our ailments. For you, Almighty King, are a faithful and merciful healer. Blessed are you, O Lord, the healer of the sick of his people, Israel. That's what this guy prayed 3 times a day for 40 years. And Jesus walks by him and waves and never heals him. Wow. Now let's look at Acts 3, 6 through 9. This man has always been wanting to stand for the standing prayer. What does Peter say? Silver and gold, I don't have any, but what I do have, I'll give you. In the name of Yeshua HaMashiach of Nazareth, rise up and walk. And he took him by the right hand, lifted him up, and immediately his feet and ankle bones received strength. And leaping up, what did he do? Stood. He stood for the standing prayer. But Christians have no idea that the standing prayer is when he stood, and that's what the Lord was trying to emphasize. And then he walked, and he entered with them into the temple, walking and leaping and praising God. And all the people saw him walking and praising God. And so God was waiting for all the Jews to be gathered in the temple, so at the very moment of the Amida, while all of Israel is praising God, to heal this man. And so I think this is amazing. And if any of you want a copy of this, we've got a copy of this prayer that's 2,000 years old. But there's another prayer in here that is completely mind-blowing to me. Are you ready? Look at this. You remember when Yeshua died, and then he was buried for 3 whole days, right? Yes, every day, what the disciples did 3 times a day. They prayed the standing prayer. Look at one of the prayers. It's the second prayer. It's called the God of nature. Now imagine this is the very prayer they prayed in the upper room 3 times a day for 3 days while, they're worried. And how many of you know they didn't want Jesus to die? Well, look at what they're praying. The God of nature. You, O Lord, are mighty forever. You revive the dead. So I hear that. I can just see them. Raise Yeshua, raise Yeshua. But they're praying this 3 times a day for over 500 years before this event even. You sustain the living with loving kindness. You revive the dead with great mercy. You support the falling. Heal the sick. You set free the bound and keep faith with those who sleep in the dust. Who is like you, O doer of mighty acts? Who resembles you, a king who puts to death and restores to life and causes salvation to flourish, and you are certain to revive the dead? Blessed are you, O Lord, who revives the dead. You think they were praying that very fervently those 3 days he was in the earth? Well, get a load of this. What is Jesus' real name was Yeshua. What is the Hebrew translation Yeshua into English supposed to be? Salvation. And the word to flourish, it talks about Adam's rod that was dead, that blossomed and budded and produced almonds. Okay, that means to flourish, to resurrect. In this very prayer, if you look toward the bottom, it says, O doer of mighty acts, who resembles you, a king who puts to death, restores to life, and causes Yeshua to resurrect. That's what they're saying in Hebrew. The Hebrew word for salvation is Yeshua. And the word flourish could be to resurrect. So 3 times a day for 3 days, they're praying this prayer that you cause Yeshua to resurrect. Can you imagine? And I believe it was at that very time, all of a sudden he appears in their midst. At the time of the evening sacrifice, 3 in the afternoon. I mean, if you don't know the Amida, you miss all the connections back that he's making. Are you ready for more? Yeah, this is the man. You can just see him asking for alms. And then those 3 days, he's in the grave, and they're praying, resurrect, resurrect. And at that very moment, all of a sudden, he resurrects, and he's standing right there in their midst. That is just crazy. Okay, here is another one. Let me see. Oh, yeah, I have John 20:19. Look at this. On the same first day of the week, when? At evening time. When is evening? 3 p.m. It says, after the doors had been locked shut where the disciples were staying because they were afraid of some of the authorities of the people of Yehuda, Yeshua came, and what did he do? He stood. He stood at the time of the standing prayer. That's when he appears to them, at the time of the evening sacrifice. And he said, chill. So here we have the very prayer that Yeshua said 3 times a day, and what they were actually praying in the upper room. Isn't that just incredible? This is the prayer. So we have a bunch of these. We can give them to you for those who want them. Okay, now I'm going to tell you another story so you can draw some really phenomenal connections. In Mark chapter 3, this is the story of the man with the withered hand. And it says, Jesus entered into the synagogue, and there was a man there who had a withered hand. And now everybody's watching Yeshua, whether he would heal him. How horrible to heal somebody on a Sabbath day. How cruel can you be? Okay, this is so they could accuse him. And Yeshua said to the man who had the withered hand, stand forth. And then Yeshua turns to the scribes and the Pharisees and says, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath days or to do evil? To save life or to destroy it? It says they held their peace. Why did they hold their peace? Because they were clueless. He caught them in a trap. They don't know how to respond. And when he looked around them with anger, being grieved for the hardness of their hearts, he said to the man, stretch forth your hand. And he stretched it out, and his hand was restored as the other. And then the Pharisees went forth, took counsel with the Herodians against him, how they might destroy him. What are your thoughts when you read this story? What comes to your mind? Jealousy? I mean, don't you think it's a little over the top to want to kill him? I mean, he healed the guy. I mean, you might be disgruntled, but why did they want to kill him? It's because of the story behind the story you don't know. Now, one of the ways to study the Torah, and this is one of the things I've learned, and there's a book called How to Study the Torah, and it tells you all the different ways that the Torah can be studied, and I'll be going over that this week and next week. But one of the things you do is look for phrases that repeat. Look for phrases that repeat, and that connects them together. That's one way. Okay. On first reading this thing, you might think it sounds perfectly straightforward. Jesus works a miracle on the Sabbath. Okay. The Jews thought it was against the law to heal on the Sabbath, and the Pharisees want to kill him. Now, if we take this account simply as being an account of a miracle, the reaction of the Pharisees is really over the top. Why would they want to kill him? Okay, but an even stranger view, which many Christians take, is, well, therefore Jesus did away with the Sabbath because he healed on the Sabbath. That's what some say. Or he did away with the law, or they say the Jews are evil. But none of that is true. Here it is, a Sabbath day. So let's think about it for a minute. What do they do on the Sabbath? They study the Torah. That's what the Jews have always done. And one of the things, how many of you know Yeshua loved to tell stories? And most of the Old Testament is stories. God knows how to relate to us through stories. And so every Sabbath, they would reenact Moses, one of the stories, to bring the Torah to life. Okay? It's not just head knowledge, it's practical knowledge. So what Yeshua is doing, he says, okay, let's go back to Moses. Let's put before you this choice. There's a blessing if you obey and a curse if you disobey. We know obeying means to pursue life, and disobeying means to pursue death. Let's look at Deuteronomy 11, 26 through 28. God says, I set before you this day a blessing and a curse. A blessing if you obey the commandments, which I command you this day, and a curse if you don't obey the commandments of the Lord your God. This is the same thing Moses says very close to the end of his life in Deuteronomy 30, verse 15 through 18. He says, see, I've set before you this day life and good, death and evil. And this is what Yeshua is saying to the scribes and the Pharisees in the temple at this time. On the Sabbath, is it better to do good or evil? Life or death? This is what he's setting before them. Now, look at Deuteronomy. It says that you may live. And then it says, if your heart turn away so you won't hear, but are drawn away and worship other gods and serve them, I denounce you to this day that you will surely perish. Okay, so why was the Sabbath created? Why was it created? It was created for mankind, yes, but it was so we would work? No, it was created so we could, but not only that, it's to have fellowship with the Father. It's not rest apart from him. It's to rest with him. Okay, so now Yeshua turns to the Pharisees and does to them what they thought they had done to him. He puts them on the spot. They were trying to get him in some kind of a Moses trap. But in the book of Deuteronomy, the texts are central to the Jewish people. They know the book of Deuteronomy. That's where the Shema is, for heaven's sake. And there are several key moments where Moses gets everybody present to assent to what he's teaching to them. Well, two of these are very well-known passages. Deuteronomy 11, which repeats the Shema. Look at this one, Deuteronomy 11, 1 through 4. He says, therefore, you will love the Lord your God, keep his charge and his statutes and his judgments and his commandments always, and know you this day, for I speak not with your children which have not known these things, or which have not seen the chastisement of the Lord your God, his greatness, his mighty hand, and what else? His stretched out arm, his miracles, his acts that he did in the middle of Egypt even, to Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and to all this land, and what he did to the army of Egypt, to their horses and chariots, how he made the water of the Red Sea overflow them when they pursued after you, and how the Lord has destroyed them to this day. Now, how many of you know every year when the Jews do Passover, they read the story of Egypt and Pharaoh and them leaving, crossing the Red Sea? That's what the whole Passover Seder is about, that they've been doing every year. Now, here we go. Are you ready? We're going to go through these kind of fast. Exodus 9:22. What do they read every Passover? The Lord said to Moses to do what? Stretch forth your hand toward heaven that there may be hail. Exodus 10:12. And the Lord said to Moses what? Okay, we'll try it one more time. Exodus 10:21. And the Lord said to Moses what? All right, we're getting it. And there was darkness repeatedly. Now look at Exodus 14:15 through 17. And the Lord said to Moses, why are you whining to me? Speak to the children of Israel that they go forward, lift up your rod and do what? Stretch out your hand. And then he says, I will harden the hearts of all the Egyptians, and they'll follow them, and I'll give me honor on Pharaoh and all of his host and his chariots and his horsemen. Now let's go to the next verse in 21 of Exodus 14. So what did Moses do? Stretched out his hand over the sea. Okay, can you get the idea? All right. Now, let's look at Exodus 14, 26 and 27. And the Lord said to Moses, what? Stretch out your hand over the sea, that the waters may come again on the Egyptians, on their chariots, and on the horsemen. And so what did Moses do? Stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned, and all the Egyptians fled, and all the Egyptians died. Every Jew knows these verses. They have it memorized. It's been 1,500 years, for heaven's sake, since this event happened for them. Well, guess what? That happened on a Sabbath. It was on a Sabbath that they left Egypt, and the first Passover is Nisan 14. Nisan 15, the first day of unleavened bread, is a Sabbath. That's when they packed up their bags and they traveled far more than a Sabbath day journey. So what is Yeshua telling them? Moses allowed them to pick up their bags and get the heck out of Egypt. And 7 days later, on another Sabbath, the last day of the Feast of Leavened Bread, is when all of the Red Sea covers them. So he's saying, look, you guys, you're trying to trap me with Moses. Moses is the one who said you could travel on the Sabbath and had a great victory. And he said, Moses is the one who said you could cross the Red Sea on the Sabbath. So he's saying, why are you telling me that I can't heal one person on the Sabbath? He wasn't doing away with the Sabbath. He was reinforcing it because they didn't understand the Sabbath. That's why I've said earlier, the priests who's supposed to know me don't even know my law. They were clueless. Okay. Now, I just got done reading how God said he would harden the hearts of all the Egyptians, right? Okay. Now, Yeshua has them in a quandary because that's why they shut up. They don't know how to respond. They know exactly what he's saying. For them, Moses was someone who they might use against Jesus, but now he's offered them the real Moses. Okay? Insinuating that the real Moses is totally against their imagined Moses in a way that's perfectly clear to them. The problem is, those Jews were following a replacement theology that imagined a Moses of their own liking. There was replacement theology back then. They were thinking of God not as he really is. They were presenting God as some harsh. I was raised Catholic, and I always saw God as throwing lightning bolts at the people down below. He was out to get us. But that's not who God is. And so replacement theology is even within the Jewish people. They're trying to, and just like we do, we try to create God in our image rather than realizing we're created in his image. But look at this. Yeshua was grieved because of the hardness of their heart. So when we read these verses, we need to connect it back to the original story. So what is happening? The man with the withered hand becomes Moses, and Yeshua tells him to do what? Stretch forth your hand. And then he's angry because of the hardness of their heart. Yeshua becomes Yahweh, God, who is telling the withered man. So they're totally upset at Yeshua because he's taking on the role of God, telling the man with the withered hand that you're Moses and stretch forth your hand, and they become the hard-hearted Egyptians who don't want him healed. But unless you understand the connections of the phrases, you miss the whole connection of what's really going on and why they wanted to kill him. Isn't that fascinating? So now Yahweh's evil because Yahweh freed everybody on the Sabbath? You can see how they caught him in a total trap, but it's because of their imagination of a different Moses than the real Moses. And that's what many Christians also do today. But what's amazing, according to forever, the leaving Egypt happened on the first day of unleavened bread. That's a Sabbath. The crossing of the Red Sea happened on the seventh day of unleavened bread, which is a Sabbath. So a lot of it is just a misunderstanding. Okay, so now, again, the question is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath or to do evil? To save life or to destroy it? God says, I do both. I save you and I destroy them. They're both good. But my question is, what do you choose? Do we want to be a hard-hearted Egyptian? Or do we want to be a God-fearing believer? Okay, so that brings me to another story. But you can see how if you know that when you're reading the Gospels, everything comes to life. It's a whole different idea when you connect the dots. This is one of my other absolutely favorite stories. Okay, you can see the map here. You can see the Sea of Galilee. You can see Capernaum up at the top. And then I want you to look toward the bottom where these two red stars are. You see Mount Moreh. Now, Moreh in the Hebrew means teacher. Okay, Yeshua was the teacher, the Moreh. But you see Shunem right there? Okay, up here's Capernaum. And then here's Nain. You notice Nain is right next to Shunem? Two miracles occurred in the Bible. One of them happened in Shunem. The other one happened in Nain. As we read the story, we're going to find out Yeshua was in Capernaum, and then he heads down to Nain. But before we do that, we're going to go and connect the dot to something in the Tanakh. 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 8. It fell on a day that Elisha passed to Shunem. So now you know where Shunem is, and that's where Elisha went, where was a great woman, and she constrained Elisha to eat bread, and so it was, as often as he passed by, he would turn in there to eat bread. Well, what happens in the story, in verse 14 through 17, Gehazi, who was Elisha's servant, answered and said to Elisha, she has no child. Her husband is old. And so Elisha said, well, call her. And when he had called her, she stood at the door, and he said, about this season, according to the time of life, you're going to have a son. And she said, no way, my Lord, you man of God, don't you lie to me. Okay. And the woman ended up conceiving and bare a son at that season that Elisha said unto her, according to the time of life. Now, one thing you may not have heard, but I believe in Jewish history, this was Jonah. It's who she gave birth to. It was Jonah. But anyway, aside from that, that happened in Shunem. Well, guess what? How many of you know little towns know everything that goes on? All right. Let's go to Luke 7, 1 and 2. Yeshua had finished speaking in the hearing of all the people. He entered into where? Capernaum. And we're going to go there in a few months. We're going to be there. A certain centurion's servant who was dear to him was sick and at the point of death. Everyone know that story, right? Well, look at this. In Luke 7, 11, and 12. It came to pass the day after, he went into a city called Nain. Okay, now we know in Shunem, a miracle happened with Elijah and a child was born. Now let's look what happens. He went into the city called Nain, and how many of his disciples went with him? Many. Could have been 1,000 or something. I mean, many of his disciples were following him. It says went with him and much people. So we're talking about a lot. And when he came nigh to the gate of the city, behold, there was a dead man being carried out, the only son of his mother. Remember in the story in Elisha, the kid ends up dying and Elisha has to go back and resurrect him back to life, laying on him 3 times. Remember that? So here a child was raised from the dead in Shunem. Well, now here in Nain, the same thing. A son, the only one of his mother, is dead and being carried out. And it says she was a widow. And how many people was with her? Much people were with her. Okay, so now here comes the story. How many of you, when you grew up, I don't know how it is in other nations. We have many nations right here in the house. But how many of you, whenever a funeral was going by, everyone's car stopped? Every car stopped, let the funeral procession go by. That was protocol, right? That comes from Judaism of 2,000 years ago. Whenever a funeral procession was taking place, the women would always be in the front, okay? And then you would have the men and the children, and at the very end was the funeral bier carrying the dead person, and they're leaving the gate of the city because you can't have dead people in the city. The cemetery was always outside of the city limits, and they would carry. And back then what would happen, whenever people were coming into a town, if there was a funeral procession going on, they would all stop, and they wouldn't enter the town, walking until the funeral procession went by. So that was history. Okay, well, here's the thing. The Jews were always into protocol. I mean, that's why they make good lawyers. They were always into what's right. Well, guess what? The Jews asked, oh my goodness, what do we do if there's a funeral procession and all of a sudden on the street comes a wedding procession? Who's supposed to stop? This happens. And they decided the wedding procession has the priority because it's about life and not death. And then they said, oh my goodness, what happens if there's a wedding procession and a funeral procession and a procession of the King of Israel? Who has to stop? Okay, so here we go. Here comes the funeral procession. Here comes the wedding procession. The funeral procession has to stop. Here comes the King of Israel. The wedding procession has to stop because the King of Israel always has the priority. Now think about this for a minute when you go back to the story. Here we have many people, it says, that are coming into the city with Yeshua. A gate is a narrow gate of the city. And many people are leaving the city with the funeral procession. There's this big clash of customs. Who is going to stop? Is the wedding procession supposed to stop? Is the Yeshua Do they recognize him as the king of Israel? Are they going to stop? Is Yeshua going to break protocol and say, let the funeral procession go, I'm backing off? Or is he going to say, I'm the king of Israel and you guys stop? See, you don't see that. Unless you know the culture, you don't realize that when it says many people were with him and many people are leaving the city and it's all at the same time, you don't make these connections. Well, listen to Luke 7:13 and 14. It says, when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her and said to her, weep not. And he came and touched the bier, and those that bore him, what did they do? The whole procession stops for the king of Israel. This is a verse that proves Yeshua in another, according to the culture and custom, is the king of Israel. And so he keeps moving from the beginning of the funeral procession all the way to the end, and everyone is standing still for him. And then what does he do? It says, young man, arise, and he that was dead sat up and began to speak. But if you don't understand the Jewish protocol, you miss the whole story, that really what this is saying is that Yeshua is the king of Israel, and they had to stop for him. Crazy, huh? Isn't this fun? So we'll look at this more next week. I'm going to show you some more amazing tie-ins. But also, if anybody doesn't have the Amida, we could get you this prayer that is amazing. So with that said, let's stand. And next week, I will give you more wonderful connections. Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King, I just pray right now that you would awaken our hearts, stir up our spirits. Father, we want to see you. We want to know you. We don't want to know about you and thrill in the fact that we know about you. We don't want to know about you. We want to know you. So, Father, touch people's hearts and ears. Father, I pray that people would be drawn closer to you and the love that you have for them, and we just want to fall in love with you over and over again. Lord, I just thank you so much for all that you're doing in all of our lives, and I pray that this weekend is going to be a blessed weekend for everybody. We just thank you so much. In Yeshua's name. And the Lord told Moses to tell Aaron to say this prayer, and in so doing, not only would he bless them, he would put his name on them. Ivarekaka Adonai va'ish mareka, Ya'er Adonai panav ilacha v'hunecha. Adonai panav ilacha v'yasem laka shalom. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. In that most wonderful name. Amen. We'll see you next week.